is Grace Giordanengo, and this is my term project for global climate change, and the subject is anthropogenic climate change. So anthropogenic climate change is the human impact on Earth's climate, which is different than natural climate change because that is the long-term, that's just the long-term alteration of temperature and typical weather patterns in a place. The place would be Earth and its atmosphere in this instance. So anthropogenic climate change can be caused through respiration, our breathing, greenhouse gases, and its many factors. Greenhouse gases come in various forms. There's fossil fuels, which is coal, oil, electricity, heat, and also through transportation, and methane, which can come from livestock manure and their gas. So actually, interestingly enough, cow gas is a big part of that methane production that causes that greenhouse gas and pollution in our atmosphere. So moving on, we have carbon, CO2, which comes from breathing through animals and humans, ourselves, and burning fossil fuels. So it all connects, goes just kind of in a greenhouse gas cycle. And I'll get into how that works after this. So around surrounding climate change and global warming, there's of course misconceptions. And debates and arguments have surfaced in the last year, or you could say 2 years, about if it's real, if it's even a big deal. And I'm here to put some of my input on that based on research and taking this class, and honestly, just a few years of me being very interested in this subject. So I'll say, of course, humans are not the main cause of global warming. There was a time when we weren't even creating enough carbon emissions to cause a sufficient amount of pollution, besides through our breathing and respirating. Industrialization is the biggest part of our contribution to this pollution, however. Before this period, the sun was the biggest contributor to warming at a more gradual rate, as well as volcanic eruptions, fires, and other excretions from Earth's surface. And what I mean by that, other excretions are the Earth actually has cracks in it, I've read, that gases can seep through just on top of the first layer of the Earth. And that causes warming. Also, to get this myth out of the way, no, we are not still coming out of the Ice Age. According to PBS, those temperatures peaked approximately 8,000 years ago. However, this does not technically mean that we're not going into the start of another Ice Age-like meltdown for new reasons, which would be caused by anthropogenic climate change, like the greenhouse effect. So what I'm saying is we could technically be going into another extreme weather event or environmental event where there's extinction, ecosystems dying, and our Earth getting much hotter than it is currently right now, or has been in the past 30 years, you could say. Since around the mid 1800s, the biggest contributor has been humans. This is mostly because of burning of fossil fuels for production and transportation, large changes in the agriculture industry, and deforestation. More subdivisions of these causes would be human overconsumption and waste. To further explain the system, I have made a diagram. I made it a few weeks ago in this class. The sun naturally radiates solar energy and always has. So here we have the sun, solar energy through these black arrows. So part of that solar energy is going to be stored heat, and it is absorbed through ocean, like water and land masses. So we can see that those reach the atmosphere, but they don't quite get out. So they are stored and they are spread throughout our atmosphere. And the rest of it is reflected solar energy, which reflects off of ice masses. Here I put like the Antarctic as an example. It can reflect off of that and out of space, also off clouds and out of space. So at the same time, while they're going out of space and staying in, that solar energy alone was keeping our atmosphere and our Earth's temperature regulated. But actually, pollution came into play. And let's say around industrialization, that was our one of our all-time highs of that. That is our all-time high of the greenhouse effect and anthropogenic climate change, human-induced climate change. So here we have that pollution, and it's just spreading. You see, it's not going out of that atmosphere. I have another diagram that I got off the internet. There's the natural greenhouse effect, which I just explained. Solar radiation going in, good amount, going out, good amount. Human enhanced greenhouse effect, anthropogenic. Enough from the sun going in, enough from the sun going out. But now we have the pollution, greenhouse gases. The greenhouse effect is causing higher heat and traps more CO2 and that heat, which is, of course, non-breathable to humans and animals. This means extinction for animals and eventually us, and dying ecosystems because that heat and emissions, those emissions are just staying in here and there's no way for them to really come out. And over time, it's just exponentially increasing, which is why it doesn't seem like it's a problem now, but there will be a time when it's too late, which could be 4 to 10 years from now or so, I've read. So more into pollution and how it affects us. So by now we know that greenhouse gases are mostly caused by the human population and our lifestyle, except for the cow gas. And I will say the big problem there is the overpopulation of cows due to industrialized farming processes. This also ties into veganism. You may wonder why people go vegan. Sometimes it's just for the fact that they don't want to eat meat or meat products just their health, but a lot of times it's because of how it can actually help our environment and to combat climate change. The reason for it is to lower that demand, that overall demand for livestock, poultry products, whatever kind of meat you usually eat. Cows usually are the biggest problem for greenhouse gases just because of, like I said, their gas. So if you want to do your part, you know, it might be easier for us to combat it if everyone will eventually go vegan. I doubt that will ever happen though. I'm not even a vegan myself, so I've I just know that that is one of the biggest practices and um, most helpful ways to combat climate change. Um, oh yes, and the demand obviously is going to affect how those farming industries produce. So if there's more demand, they're going to produce more, even if that means overproducing and more waste, which would mean less use for those cows, which are polluting our earth. So species extinction, which includes ourselves, and the dying of ecosystems is of course an ongoing issue. And besides from poaching, climate change is one of the biggest reasons for this occurrence. So to start off, ecosystems. The dying of them is caused by deforestation for land management. Sometimes it's just for use of big companies. Sometimes it's for mining and so on. Agriculture, of course, oil and other mining. Glacial melting is also a part of dying ecosystems. Glacial melting that will tie in with the species, which I will explain after this. Coral reef bleaching. So part of coral reef bleaching. It's a very interesting cycle, actually. So, let me look on my phone. I'll read some of my discussions are on Canvas, and I've talked about glacial melting and coral reef bleaching as well as solutions. Um, so, coral reef bleaching. There is something in it called, in the coral reef, any coral reef, that's called symbiotic algae, and it's part of the tissue within all coral. It acts as a type of life force for the overall health of the reef, aiding in growth as well as fighting off bad bacteria. However, it is very sensitive to these climate issues. When exposed to too much or little air or a certain level of increased heat, it stops doing its job to keep coral alive. Part of that increased heat is caused by and like air, exposed air is because of changes in sea level, which is also caused by climate change, of course. Climate scientists are, for the most part, predicting that we are in the sixth occurrence of our coral reefs being close to dying off. Obviously, our coral reef is very strong because it's avoided death 6 times now. Although, of course, there's always an end. And that's going to be very sad when the coral reef can no longer actually grow because it is, in fact, dead. It's just going to be, you could say, a pile of bones in the sea left over. That's really sad to think about. And that's the whole fact of climate change. Everything has to come to an end. But the big idea is to combat it and find ways because it is our Earth. Why wouldn't we want to protect it? You know? Moving on to glacial melting. So for this, I will use polar bears as an example, which I've also used in a discussion post previously. So animals cannot live without their natural habitats, of course, as well as us. So polar bears live, for the most part, on ice masses. They also have great grasslands, but like I said, for the most part, ice masses. If that glacial melt is just decreasing, by the way, I didn't mention yet. I'll get back to this part. I did not mention yet that um, glacial melting is has is expected to decrease by 13% each decade, and it already has been decreasing by 13% each decade for the past 30 years. So if you think about it, if it's just going to keep decreasing by 13%, and let's say exponentially, because throughout the whole history of our time, global warming has been exponentially growing as a problem. If that just 13% keeps going every decade, that means there's going to be no more glaciers, no more ice masses in the Arctic. That, therefore, I'll get to my point about polar bears. If there's no more ice mass for them, they have nowhere to be except for that amount of grasslands. But they're not really meant to live on the grasslands. They're supposed to live on the glaciers, ice masses. So that's going to make it so their population can't sustain itself, can't even grow, because there's just simply not going to be enough room for them. They'll be overpopulated at that point for the size of their habitat. Also, it's a whole cycle. So polar bears, their prey, let's say fish and birds, they're also not going to be able to survive those changing temperatures or want to stay in those conditions. So we'll just say the fish are going to have to go to another place that's colder. Eventually, they're going to die off. They're not going to be able to find any colder place in the Arctic if the ice is just melting and melting away. That means there's not going to be fish for the polar bears. The birds are not going to want to be in that warming area if they're used to the cold temperatures. Eventually, they will die off. The food chain will become unbalanced. And maybe even before that happens, all of the polar bears, fish, birds, all of those species will have to die off. That's also an extremely sad fact, and it's happening all around our world. Species going extinct. Eventually, I probably want to be around for it, and anyone watching this will not be around for it at the time of me making this, of course. But why would we not want to keep our Earth going for its future inhabitants, animals and humans? So here I'll go back to the coral reef again. Like I said, it kind of just looks like a sea of bones, doesn't it? But actually, it's still able to grow. It's not dead yet. Like we said, we are in our sixth occurrence of it being close to dying. But this is what it could look like forever, just in not growing. Actually, it could just be dissolving away, as a matter of fact. So that would be sad to see a world without that coral reef. And here, sorry if this is a little bit triggering, but I also think it's important for us to see the hard parts of climate change, just so we know how big of an impact it has on our fellow species on this earth. Here we have polar bears. And I just put this to represent the fact that there's not going to be healthy enough or well populated enough polar bears if ice masses are just gradually decreasing. And this represents its prey and it not being able to sustain its health, you know, like I already explained. But yes, two sad images as well as the coral reef. So here we have natural climate solutions, and this is actually a big part socially and politically, I would say, in our economy of ways to combat climate change, natural climate solutions. So we have 3 steps: protect, improve, and restore. So the first 2 steps are actually going to be the fastest and most cost efficient. Protect from loss, kind of just like sustain what our natural earth is providing us. Improve management, obviously, turn to better standards of agriculture, better methods of production. There's ways that we're trying to do that slowly but surely. And electric cars instead of there's obviously flaws with that too. Electric cars instead of just relying on gas and diesel vehicles, you know. It's also better forest management and also better livestock methods, as in um, part of, the vegan part actually goes with that too. There's better ways for agriculture to make less of a negative impact on our earth. Agriculture methods, I mean, if there are less people eating cows, which means eating beef, and which means less need for more cows, which are also part of creating that carbon footprint, you could say, or carbon hoofprint. Um, so yeah, protect and improve is going to be the fastest and most cost efficient way. However, restore is actually, oh, also sustainable living methods would be a part of that. You can do that yourself. Recycling, reusing, composting, um, riding your bike more, walking, using your car less, using less water in your house, taking less showers, using less electricity, converting to solar power, all those little things. You can look into it actually. There's so many articles that tell you even simple steps, and less human consumption, of course, and waste ties in with that. So, the natural climate solutions carbon displacement method that is part of restore native cover, as you can see right there. And that is actually very interesting to me. And I just learned about this, I think, 2 weeks ago, where you take carbon, I guess you could say, out of the air atmosphere from one place and displace it into another area which actually needs it. So you could say, like, forest lands, jungles, just places with a lot of plants that produce oxygen. Because as you should know, um, plants take in carbon that we breathe out, and you could say they breathe out. They produce oxygen, which we can breathe in. So it's a really good cycle. But you would think that with all the carbon in the air right now, it would just kind of be inhaled, you could say, by those plants. But the thing is, deforestation is also a big part of that. If there's not enough plants to be taking in that carbon, then there's not enough plants, of course, for um, to be putting out enough oxygen to sustain our earth better. So a way that we could get rid of some of that carbon is to feed it into those wetlands, forests, jungles, just plant places so that they can grow better, and also improving management of those places and protecting them instead of just cutting down trees for unneeded purposes, which ties in with the waste. Like I said, it's a big cycle. So the restore plan is taking carbon, putting it in places that need it so they can actually use it, produce more oxygen, really kind of evening out oxygen and carbon levels reducing climate change and its effects. The last solution, I would say, is one of the most important because it marks the start of everything, all of these steps and solutions. It's climate education. And of course, this presentation is part of climate education in a little way, as well as this class that we're taking right now, Global Climate Change, that I'm presenting to you right now. Climate education really is the start of everything. And I already said that there has been so much debate and argument this year that could be avoided if more people just looked into real scientific articles and even just listened a little bit better and kind of open their minds to the fact that this is a real thing. It's scary. And I know that could be a big part of it too, that the fact that people don't want it to be real, so they kind of shut it off. But that's not a real solution. That's not a real way of living, is it? If you're not going to protect Earth, if you're not going to help find solutions, this is a real thing that's happening, and more people need to know about it. And it starts with you. It starts with, if you are not educated, educate yourself. If you are educated, try and educate others in the best way possible. I do my best. I have a family who doesn't really believe in climate change. They're actually the ones who informed me that of the fact that they they thought that we were in an ice age still. No, that's not true, which I have explained to them many times. It's really hard, in my personal experience, to get through that closed offness, but it's just so important to open everyone up to this because you know what that means. If more people believe in it, more funding, more financial aid going towards this, which is going to overall help in saving our Earth and combating climate change. And I believe that is all I have for this presentation, and I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that if you have not, you will look more into these solutions and more into just some weird facts about climate change and how cows' gas can mean the end of our species or any animal species. That's one of the weirder ones, as I've already said. So feel free to do that. And also, like I said, educate others and educate yourself. That's what's most important.